Hello, it's Davina, and we're here with another art lesson. Now, we have tackled a lot so far. We've gone through line and shape. We've talked about symmetry and drafting tools. We've done all kinds of things, including tackling space. And by now, you're thinking, well, can we get into color? No, not yet. Before we do color, we need to do one more thing with black and white, and that is shade and tint. Shade is when you take a color and then you add in black or overlay black on top. And that way you get a shaded part or a shadowed part. And you can keep doing that until you've got pure black on top of whatever the original color was. Tint is where you start with white and then you add in another color until you are fully into that other color. Sometimes you start with color and then you overlay on top layers and layers of white, but usually you start with the white and then you go from there. Now, what happens when you're just putting white and black together? Well, some people would say, oh, well, obviously, if it's more white than black, it is tint all the way until the middle point, and then as soon as you hit 50-50, on the last half of the 50-50, it is all shade. But there's a thing about that. White, our eyes are fairly sensitive to, and I find once you get to about 25% black to 75% white, or 3 parts white to 1 part black, everybody registers that as gray. It is definitely a gray. It's not a tint of white anymore. It is gray, which is a shadowy color. So we're going to talk about that dividing line of when are we going into tint and when are we going into shade. Now, as long as you're working with one color to begin with, let's say a colored piece of paper, it's pretty easy to see the difference where you're adding in tints of white for the highlights and putting in shadows and shades of black for the undertones. So we're going to be working on this so that our shapes that we've made before can look 3-dimensional on a 2-dimensional plane. Now, if you haven't noticed, I love thrift store shopping. I don't know when I picked up this paper, but it has aged to the point where it's got this lovely sepia tone, which means it goes so well with chalk and charcoal as a medium tone. Now, the first couple pages aren't too hot, but you know what? I'll skip to later on. And what you can do with your students is have them kind of test things out. We're going to start off with one of our charcoal pencils here. We're going to start as dark as we can get and then go as light as we can get. So press down hard, lighten up a little bit, lighten up a little bit more, lighten up even more. Now, my line got smaller and smaller as I was going that way, but if I were to try to keep this the exact same width, there we go. Okay, so I've got as dark as it can be at this end, going to sort of medium darkness, going to lighter and lighter and lighter. Okay, so that's charcoal pencil. Let's try charcoal line. Now this, I can't press as hard, but I can still get a dark, not quite as dark, but I have a much easier time getting it into the lights. Oh, but see how quickly it erases? So this vine doesn't have the lasting power. And if I really wanted this to stay, I'd probably have to hit it with some sort of sealant, even if that's hairspray, which I know they don't really advise for fancy archival artwork, but I mean, if you're working with kids, just hitting it with a quick spray of hairspray will hold that so it doesn't too quickly smudge. Okay, so now I'm going to pull out a chalk pastel of black, as dark as it goes. Go over that a couple times. Okay, so this one's got a very similar quality to that pencil. There we go. Okay, so there's that. Now I could do this with pencil as well, but I'm just wanting to work with these charcoals that really give you a nice, deep, almost velvety black. Let's try it in the other direction. And by the way, if your fingers are getting a little bit charcoaly, just rub them on that art eraser that I told you about. Okay, let's start with regular chalkboard chalk. As bright as I can go. Pressing down nice and hard, lightening up slightly. There we go with the white. Let's do it with some chalk pastel. Now this one doesn't smudge as much, but it also requires more pressure to get it on the paper. Here's that. I'm now going to switch to one of my other favorites, which is an oil pastel. Oil pastels, they tend to pick up other colors, so sometimes you just need to smooch and clean them off before you use them. Otherwise, you're going to end up with a whole rainbow cornucopia of colors that you didn't expect to see in your artwork because they just picked it up from being in the box together. Okay, so oil pastel. Now, the thing about oil pastel is as you're rubbing it, it warms up the oil that's in the oil pastel, and that friction is what helps it grip the paper. So if you've got something that's super smooth, the oil pastel is not going to quite cling to it as well. But you can also layer it, and because it's got that oil, it will smoosh together more like an oil paint. So it's sort of partway in between chalk and paint with how this pigment is. Okay, so I've got 3 different charcoals. I've got 3 different chalks. So I could just do this and keep practicing this and practicing this, but I just find having a goal is a lot easier for students to, grip their minds around than just doing, oh, we're going to see how this hash mark makes it look, or this shading makes it look. No, just maybe do this a little bit and then actually let your students make something that looks like a thing. Now, I suggest you get yourself some white pieces of paper and some black pieces of paper cut about the same size, and that you get yourself some charcoal and some chalk. Now, there's more than one type of charcoal and there's more than one kind of chalk. There are charcoal pencils that are kind of cool and neat, and you can, tear a little bit and then peel this away and then get more charcoal to be able to draw with. And then there are vine sticks that are delicate and also very nice to draw with for finer lines when you're working with charcoal. So those are all good. There's also charcoal pastels where it's kind of pressed with an oil or something like that, and it'll end up in more of a stick form like this. Which brings me to our chalk. There's simple, chalkboard style chalk that we're all used to. There's chalk pastels that are in more of this pressed stick form. I find that if I'm using chalkboard chalk, doing a trick like this where I take the cap of a pen that's probably dried out and I have it held in that, makes it just easier to draw with without getting it all over my fingers. And when it comes to your first shape, I recommend that you start with a circle and you start trying to make that circle seem 3D. When you're doing that with the white paper and the black charcoal, you're going to do a very light outline of your circle, and then you're going to shade in where the shadows are, maybe make yourself a little of a horizon line, and you're going to leave light in the negative space, whatever the highlight spot of the circle would be. But when you're doing chalk, it's just the opposite. You're not going to draw the outline of your circle. Instead, you're going to draw everything around, kind of a crescent moon, and then focusing on the highlight spot and then smudging out your chalk, maybe giving yourself a bit of a horizon line that doesn't actually touch the supposedly dark object as you do everything except for the shadows on that. You're going to end up with a lot of probably darker than you anticipated balls on white paper and a lot of lighter than you anticipated balls on the dark paper. And when you have a little mistake in charcoal or chalk, I recommend that you get some of this kneaded eraser. This is kneaded or art eraser. I know it looks like that tacky stuff that you put up posters on the walls with, but no, this is an eraser. And if you have lines in places that you don't really like them, you just kind of smudge them out with this and then knead it again to revitalize it. I'm gonna now do an actual sphere on this paper. So I'm going to start off, I want something that's easy to erase. So I'm going to start with the vine charcoal. It's really good for that. Now I'm just going to freehand a circle. Is it going to be perfect? Oh, heck no. But it's going to be there, and I'm going to put my horizon line in the background. And no, that wasn't level. I'll live. And light source, right now my light is coming in from that door, so just like these two, my light source is there, so my shadow's gonna be in that lower crescent. Okay, we're good with that. Now with my most erasable white, I'm gonna say, here's my shiny spot. Okay, and I think just like I have going on here with a dark table and a white wall, I'm going to continue that in my art piece. I'm going to have a white wall in the background and a dark table. You don't have to do it this way. You could have a dark wall with a light table. I have a dark wall here and a lighter table as well to really make that shadow show up on the white paper. But because this paper is a medium color, because of the sepia aging, I get to use my negative space to my advantage. Okay, I will come back with more chalk later to the outer edge of my sphere, but I need to actually start working on the shading. So I'm going to pop out with my charcoal pencil. I think I want to have a little bit more of it available. So now this, if you remember my previous page, I was able to get a very dark velvety black, but see how it smudges? Oh, I gotta be careful about this. If I drag my hand through the chalk or the charcoal, it'll blur everything. Okay, so here where it contacts the table is going to be the darkest spot on my sphere. And yeah, my sphere is already an oval shape, but I'll go from there. And if the light's coming from that direction, and then the shadow from the point where my sphere is touching is gonna come out behind my sphere. Now, do I know exactly how that is? I'm using my imagination, but I've got a pretty good one of those. It's coming there. There's going to be a little bit of this side that gives it a shadow. So there we go, and there. Now, I'm coming to the point where it's a little bit difficult to do the shading with this one, so I'm going to go back to my vine. Ta-da! So I recommend doing a ton of these things. Every once in a while, maybe get your hand in a little bit, but really just try to work on an object to begin with. Well, that's pretty simple. Had white paper, added some black marks to it, came up with something that looks like a circle has turned into a three-dimensional sphere on that paper. Great. Started with some black paper, added white to it until I had a circle that looks like a sphere in 3 dimensions on my 2-dimensional plane. I've got these 2 things done. I'm done, right? No. I want every time you pick up charcoal or chalk, you start by warming up and making a sphere. And, this might seem a little bit boring, but really, it's just to get those juices flowing and to get you used to shading in all of the range of shades that can happen, because that happens over a smooth spherical surface when it's lit up from an angle. And eventually, after a year, you're going to move away from just, one sphere to maybe a couple spheres. And maybe in 5 years, you're going to stop doing opaque spheres, but you're starting to do bubbles and crystal balls and marbles and chrome ball bearings and all kinds of other types of spheres. All of them using black charcoal and white chalk. I love black charcoal and white chalk for doing still lifes, for doing sketches, for doing portraiture, quick portraiture. I find the intensity of colors that I can get with that black and white on a different colored background is really quite lovely. And my negative space does over half the work for me in most of those pieces. So once you've made a bunch of shaded spheres just out of your own head, not based on anything in real life, you're probably going to want to actually do some still life, which means fruit. And I recommend plastic fruit. Tons of plastic fruit of different sizes and shapes. But when you're first starting, I recommend that you have 2 sets of fruit. Buy 2 of everything, and 1 you leave as it is colored by the manufacturer, and another you spray paint matte white. Why spray paint it matte white? Well, when you're working on shading, the first time around, okay, this lemon is obviously a lighter color than this pomegranate. However, this pomegranate also has a bunch of dots on it and things like that, and that could be a little bit difficult to translate when you're just starting out. And if these were both the exact same white, it would be easier to just focus on the shape of the object instead of the shape and the color and the texture of the object. For example, these two apples, if I've got a matte apple and a shiny apple, this shine here is giving me extra bright spots that I have to account for, whereas this matte apple doesn't have it as much. So that's why I recommend 2 sets of fruit. Buy 2 of everything, and one of them spray paint it matte white, and the other one you can leave as is. And eventually you're going to start off with a fruit on the table. And then it's going to be multiple fruits on the table. And then it's going to be fruits in a bowl, fruits on a plate, fruits on a wrinkled up piece of fabric, and eventually fruits in a pretty bowl on a wrinkled up piece of fabric of different colors, shapes, and sizes. Ta-da! So as you work on these still lifes, you're going to slowly get your eye in for seeing the shape of an object as it is, seeing the shading of the object to get its dimension, then introducing shading for the color of the object being portrayed. And after all of that, you can have still life, realistic drawings out of charcoal or pencil or chalk or pastels. So this will slowly lead you into color. But if you're just going grayscale, the difference between red and green, anybody who knows about the most typical type of color blindness will tell you they're actually similar once you hit them into grayscale. So it's sometimes just easier if you have everything all one color to begin with, and then introduce the different depth of color through shading. This next project is definitely a case of where the materials that you use dramatically change the look of your project. If you want to do this where it's just on paper with the materials we've been using before, you can just do that and it'll be more of a shading project. This here is actually done with straight up crayon, like kids' crayon. You don't have to go for the fancy pastels or charcoals if you don't want to. So there's this version of the same exact project, or you could do it with paints. Now this is done with tempera paints, and that's great for working with kids. You can also do it with acrylics or even oil paints. In fact, with older kids, I would have them do the exact same project, once with tempera, once with acrylic, and then once with oil paints, so that they can kind of get the feel of each of those mediums. And the basis of this project is you start off with a few rules with lines and shape, and then you work with tint and with shade to fill in those lines and shapes. So I'm going to be using canvas pad paper. I find that this is a lot less expensive than getting actual canvas boards or stretched canvas, and it seems to work really well for kids. Let's see, which side do I like better? I think I like the texture on this side better. I'm working with acrylics because I find I don't have the patience for letting oil paints dry, and I didn't have any tempera paint on hand. So tempera, yeah. I'm probably mispronouncing that this whole time. So we're gonna start with 5 rules. Remember what I said before is you make rules and you follow them until you're a master, and then you can break or fudge the rules. So the first rule is I need to have a line from one side of my page to the other that is straight. Now I can just freehand it, or I can use a ruler to try and make sure that it's super straight, and I think I'm going to do that. But my ruler, my ruler is not quite long enough to do a long one there, so I'm just gonna do my straight line. Not exactly in the middle, and that's okay, because everything would be changed if I were to do an angled line or something like that. Okay, so we've got one line. Now we need two curved lines that touch sides that are next to each other. So I need a curved line either here or here, and another one either here or here. So I'm gonna do curved line there, and I'm gonna do another one there. Okay, two curved lines. Now I could have done any kinds of curved lines. Those are just the ones that I chose. Okay, so I've got 1, 2, okay, I need 3 going the short direction on my page. Now I could just go straight and do 1, 2, 3, and that's just fine. Or I can do zigzags, but it has to touch the top, well, both sides on the short angle. So I think I am going to do 1, 2, 3. There we go. There's my 3. 1, 2, 3. Okay, now I need 4 shapes. I'm gonna say 4 circles. I'm gonna go with circles. And I'm just gonna freehand them. So I'm gonna do 1, 2, 3, and 4 or 4. 4. 1, 2, 3. Let's go with 4. There. Okay. And for 5, I need to put a line on here that has squiggles. 5 squiggles. Okay. So I've got 1 squiggle, 2 squiggle, 3 squiggle, 4 squiggle. 1, 2, 3, 4. I need one last one. 5 squiggles. Okay. There we go. Those were my 5 rules. You could have stopped at 4 rules or at 3 rules, but you need to have enough spaces on there because now every one of these different shapes or boxes or things like that needs to have its own unique tint or shade in it. So this is going to be different than that, which is different from that, which is different from that, different from that, different from that, different from that. So it's time for us to get mixing. If you're going to be spending your money on art supplies, you might want to spend some on cute little palette holders like this or like this. However, this one got stained green and this one I just have not been able to get that blue and red out of there. So I'm not going to use this one because I don't want to pollute my my black and white. This one I know it's just a stain, so I'll probably end up using this. If you don't want to spend money, you can use egg cartons or mochi. I think this is from a mochi dessert. But the more compartments you have, the more room you have to mix things. All right, so I put this on a scale and I put equal weight of the white and the black acrylic. I've got my one paintbrush that I'm going to use to blend. I'm going to actually start with wherever I want there to be an actual pure white section. Now, you should do this even though the canvas is white, because if you've ever tried to match the white paint on a wall, you'll know that there are gray whites and yellow whites and pinkish whites, and then there's glossy versus semi-gloss versus matte. And if you're doing a piece and you leave the bare canvas there as your white color, it can be a little bit difficult to make things match up. So I think I'm going to pick my 3 smallest sections and paint those white. Could I have purposefully chosen a paintbrush small enough to do this? Yes, but I wanted to use the same brush for the entire piece. Okay, I've got my 3 smallest sections, all of them painted white. And does it really, in this lighting, make much of a difference? Not yet, but I can tell that there is a slight difference, and so it was totally worth it to do that. Now, I need to slowly introduce black to the white. So, I'm going to take a big chunk of my white. I'm going to take a little piece of black, and I'm going to mix that in. Nice and thoroughly. Okay, that's a pretty gray right there. Okay, and now I'm going to go with these 3 sections. It's actually a pretty strong gray. So I think what I'm going to do is, once I've filled this in, I'm going to try to go slightly lighter with my next set. Now white is so sensitive to black that I only used that one little dab of black to get all these different shades of gray. Some of them are really quite dark. So I've washed my brush. I'm just going to put pure black in my 4 circles. So there we have a variety of experiments and projects using tint and shade. This is a fairly inexpensive type of project. I mean, you only need 1 or 2 paints, 1 or 2 crayons or oil pastels or chalks to be able to do any of these projects. The next project that we're going to be doing actually uses color. Finally, what everybody's been waiting for. And with that, you're going to want to purchase either some tempera, some acrylic paints, or oil pastels. I'm particularly going to be working with oil pastels. So for the next, get a colored sheet of paper and oil pastels. Thank you so much for joining me in this art exercise. I hope you can find ways to incorporate this into other lessons that you may be teaching. Have a great day. Goodbye.